So which are the strongest Space Marine characters that you can include in an army list? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're back to talk Space Marines, and today we're looking at the leaders and the support characters, talking about which ones are best, most commonly played, and why. A little while back I made a similar video to this about the Space Marine troops choices, where I basically took every single Space Marine list that broke into a top 4 at a grand tournament over the last few months, and saw what choices people were taking the most frequently. I think it's a fairly decent way of narrowing down what works best in practice, as to get towards the top spots of these events you do actually have to have a fairly efficient list as well as just command it well. With that in mind, I thought we'd talk through the different character choices in the Space Marine Codex, how often they appeared in all these lists, and why I think the ones that are appearing quite so frequently are doing so. For the purposes of this comparison, I'm not going to look at special characters within each codex. I'll touch on a few of them that came up the most commonly, but obviously for any given chapter that does kind of skew what choices might be best, as you might have a special character equivalent that might do better than one of these options. So in any case, let's start with a few of the choices that didn't quite break into the top 5, then we'll go through the top 5 individually. First up we have the Space Marine Apothecary with 3 selections, who honestly I was kind of expecting to see a bit more commonly taken, as he really was played quite a lot when the Space Marine Codex first dropped. When they appear, they're almost upgraded to Chief Apothecaries, and then given that Selfless Healer Warlord trait, the one that basically allows them to resurrect a model from the grave for free each turn. I think towards the start of 9th we were seeing quite a lot of really quite big Gravis armor type lists, with things like Plasma Inceptors and Eradicators being significantly cheaper, and now they went up in points a bit, and the Apothecary got stopped from resurrecting those Invader ATVs. They just perhaps don't bring quite as much value to Marine lists. I think they've been disincentivized as well recently, due to the cost of the Chief Apothecary upgrade going up a bit. To be honest, the Sanguinary Priests and Ravenwing Apothecaries in Blood Angels and Dark Angels seem to be really quite commonly played within their own factions, both being significantly faster to get where they need to be, and particularly the Blood Angels one offers a lot of extra utility, putting squads into Assault Doctrine. They're both still really quite common picks, and if they'd been included they would have broken just into the top 5. It still would have been close though, and people certainly aren't spamming Apothecaries quite as much as they often were. Sticking with the Elite section, the Judicia got 5 selections, a nice cheap fighty character who's got the very helpful Fight Last aura, and he tends to be seen escorting a squad of Space Marine elites around, quite often Blade Guard veterans who can quite comfortably fit within his aura. He just makes them very hard to approach in melee, and then can also do a decent amount of damage back himself, so could be a good optional support for those sort of units. Seems good enough to see play, but still perhaps a bit niche. Next up we come to Ancients, who were taken 4 times throughout the lists, though to be honest people don't really seem to be taking the Ancient for their main ability, the shoots on death thing, which could be a bit more effective in Space Marine character castles in 8th. Instead they usually just tend to be a caddy for relic banners and things, most notably the Pennant of Remembrance in Dark Angels, which is a good reason to run a Terminator or a Blade Guard one. That's the one that can give an already durable Death Ring squad -1 damage. The Company Champion had no selections at all that I found for the generic datasheet. I know that he can be upgraded to punch well above his weight with a few relic option combinations, but I can see why he's passed over for other options. For example, a Captain he can also upgrade to be very fighty, has better mobility, flexibility of gear, and buffs nearby troops as well, and in my opinion doesn't cost significantly more. I think generally if characters are going to be slow and want to be getting stuck into melee, they do need to be very cheap to justify them. Of course, which characters are strongest for your army really is going to depend on chapter somewhat, particularly if you're playing a more ranged or melee focused chapter for example. Here are just a few of the more commonly selected chapter specific options. For Dark Angels we have plenty of Talon Masters, always going to be an interesting choice with heavy firepower coupled with character protection, Ezekiel as an efficient librarian for Interromancy powers, or the Ravenwing Apothecary as we've already mentioned. Bjorn and Murderfang see good play with the Space Wolves, both really efficient Dreadnought characters. White Scar's often seeing Kosaro Khan and also the Khan on bike. Kosaro Khan is utterly vicious for the points and great at buffing White Scar's melee with his +1 to wound, and the Khan on bike is similarly efficient to bike captains. For Blood Angels we see a lot of Sanguinary Priests, and for Black Templars Chaplain Grimaldus is perhaps the most common pick. Now let's move into the top 5 selections, and we'll start out in 5th place with Chaplains, who got 8 selections. There really wasn't all that much diversity in the picks here. Pretty much everyone tends to take the Primaris Chaplain on bike, with 1 or 2 maybe taking one with a jump pack. For the extra points he does bring a lot more than the standard Chaplain. Really good move to get those litanies exactly where you need them to be, and very tough behind that 4+ invul, toughness 5 and 7 wounds, meaning that he's far better placed to resist around a bolter fire or something. He is a somewhat expensive choice at 140 points if you take Master of Sanctity, which might be one of the reasons that hold people back from them a bit, if the most efficient chaplain is really one that you have to plough quite a lot of points into. Pretty much everyone does take the Master of Sanctity upgrade, and it's easy to see why. He does 1 litany otherwise, he does 2 for an extra 25 points, doubling his buffing power, and on top of that you can make him even more efficient by taking that Wise Orator Warlord trait to make him cast the litanies on 2s. As you can't command reroll them, you ideally don't want them to be failing at the wrong moment, and this is most certainly how I'd run one myself. The majority of the litanies do seem to see play, in particular +1 to hit and wound at shooting are quite nice combined with things like the Relic Contemptor Dreadnought. The Volkite Culverins really seem to like that. Otherwise you can get +1 to wound in melee, +2 to charge when you have your Vanguard veterans bounding across the table, and the 4 rerolls to hit in close combat is no bad thing either, and always one to fall back on when you get stuck in. He does have the potential to be a very decent melee threat in his own right as well. If he takes the Benediction of Fury and possibly the Mantra of Strength litany, then he can be an absolute monster, particularly in certain chapters like White Scars, where he can advance and charge with an absolutely enormous threat range. Space Wolves, Black Templars and White Scars seem to be some of the chapters that enjoy running him the most. Next up, and in 4th place, we have the Lieutenants, who very slightly edged out the Chaplains at 9 selections, but don't seem to be quite as popular for the reroll and fighting thing compared with standard Captains. They are a little bit cheaper though, so if literally all you want is a reroll 1's aura to make your shooting slightly more efficient, then Lieutenant will give you a little bit more bang for your buck if you don't think they're going to be getting in combat all that much. The most common 2 patterns to be taken were the Indomitus pattern Lieutenant and the Reaver pattern, the Indomitus being the one with the Storm Shield and Relic Blade, who if you're going for a Lieutenant on foot just seems like a really efficient choice. He gains the invul save and the 2+ armor from the shield, and a very dangerous combat weapon to boot. The Reaver one's maybe a bit more of an interesting choice, in that it makes him the cheapest character that can innately deep strike, which is pretty handy just by itself. He certainly doesn't have the same melee threat as the Foot Lieutenant, so is far more of a utility piece, and can be an interesting one to use things like Terror Troops for, so he can potentially strip OBSEC from an enemy unit, then even maybe use Rites of War to give himself OBSEC to just waltz on and steal an objective, maybe with a unit. He's also got Shock Grenades and Smokescreen, 2 things that could well come in handy, and he does seem to be a particularly good bearer for the Ultramarine Seal of Oath, the very solid reroll relic that allows you 4 rerolls to hit and wound against one chosen unit. Certainly means something like Grav Devastators or Plasma Inceptors would have a pretty reasonable chance of just removing whatever they fire at. Still though, it seems hard to go too far wrong with a foot-longy Lieutenant with a Storm Shield, just marching up the board with Rites of War to give it to other forward-moving units. Next on the list, in 3rd place, we have Tech Marines, who I'll be honest, I was surprised to see quite this high. The Primaris Tech Marine tends to be taken far more than the standard one, and I do think that he adds a lot more utility for the very small points difference. For the price though, I do think they're really quite good value. They boost a vehicle's ballistic skill to make them hit a little bit better, repair D3 wounds a turn, and just for the raw stats and war gear that you get included on the character, they've got some reasonable melee plus a servo arm, very good shooting for a cheap support character with that Forge Bolter, and a 2+ armor save for some extra survivability. If you are running any vehicles at all, they are certainly an efficient HQ. People seem to upgrade them to Masters of the Forge more often than not, an extra 20 points to make them auto-heal 3 wounds rather than the D3. That could add up to a fair few more wounds of vehicle piled back onto the table over the course of the game, but it's quite nice just for the reliability. Tech Marines will only be good as long as vehicles are good, and they're most often seen in the tow of Redemptors or Relic Contemptors with the Volkite weapons, both of which are enormously efficient gun platforms in themselves, and you could get some very efficient shooting out of them between the Tech Marines buff, rerolls from Wisdom of the Ancient, and maybe other character auras. I think you can normally justify Tech Marine whenever you've got 2 or more Dreadnoughts around. Most Space Marine chapters can run them at least fairly efficiently, and Deathwatch Ultramarines and even White Scars, strangely enough, do seem to be fairly common places for them to be found. Next up and second on the list we have the Librarians, who again I was maybe very slightly surprised by their prevalence. They got 15 selections, so almost twice as many Librarians on the board as Chaplains. Librarians don't do all that much aside from provide psychic powers and psychic defense, and there tended to be a fairly even split between upgrading them with jump packs or just running them on foot as standard Primaris ones, with the occasional Phobos one cropping up here and there as well. The book powers were certainly improved in the last Space Marine Codex change. Null Zone's always amazing for removing some invul saves and making one unit just die very easily. Psychic Fortress pairs well with a lot of Marine units with a 3+ save, Redemptor Dreadnoughts in particular, and Might of Heroes can make a Smash character go into absolute rage mode. Otherwise, I think that some of the stronger chapter librarians are the other ones I've listed here. Space Wolf Rune Priests can give you cover or make the enemy fight last with Murderous Hurricane. White Scars can hand out a +2 to charge. Salamanders can make a unit really durable with Fire Shield and Drakeskin. Iron Hands have all manner of helpful spells to help out vehicles. Deathwatch can give a squad a Feel No Pain, and quite a lot of the Interromancy discipline for Dark Angels is useful, though they do often tend to be running Ezekiel as opposed to generic librarians. In general, their melee isn't terrible, but they're not going to be taking out entire squads by themselves, though being able to kill enemies out of phase with Smite can be really handy for a clever bit of manipulation. In general, I've always felt that librarians are quite powerful, but also maybe need a little bit more careful use than some of the other characters, really fragile if they're able to be targeted, and can potentially be countered with Deny the Witch, but if you can get their powers going off at the right time, it can certainly propel a Space Marine list to greatness. Finally, we come to the top of the list, and it would seem that the most selected Space Marine HQ choice is the trusty Space Marine Captain. Like the Lieutenants, he gives reroll and melee abilities, and he pays a 15-point tax for his invul from the Iron Halo and his extra attack and wounds. I think maybe the reason they see so much more play though is perhaps because of the different ways that you can field them, particularly the Captain on bike. He was the one that was taken the most frequently out of all the various types you can take, 10 times out of 22, and I feel that he just gives you a really good deal between extra durability, masses of extra speed, and also not a bad shooting attack with those twin bolt guns on the bike too. Otherwise, the next most common were the Jump Pack for the mobility, and the Indomitus Pattern Captain for similar reasons to the Lieutenants. Plenty of other named captains or chapter masters were also fielded, though not included in the count. A bit under half the people who use captains chose to upgrade them to chapter masters, really quite a pricey upgrade for 40 points, and certainly means that you don't want to just be cannonballing them forward to their death, but the extra rerolls are quite nice to be able to double down on a really key unit each turn, and have them get the maximal amount of damage through. Quite nice alongside big units of Vanguard veterans, or Redemptors or Contemptors pouring out a bit of firepower. Quite nice to know that it's a good option, but not necessarily an auto-include. In any case, it would seem that you can't really go too far wrong with the Captain, particularly if he's got a bike, a nice boost of nearby damage, and perhaps the heaviest melee threat that the chapter can offer in the HQ department. So that just about brings us to the end of our look through Space Marine characters. Really quite interesting to see what people are running in real games and top lists, as opposed to just theory hammer as to which is best. I look forward to hearing your thoughts though, and what's right for your chapter and why. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. There'll certainly be plenty more for the Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos quite a bit on the channel, I would just like to mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which is what allows me to keep on going like this quite so often. If you are watching the videos a lot, any support is enormously appreciated, and you can find the link down in the video description. I do try and give some decent rewards to channel patrons, seeing new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.